Hello. So it's Thursday, the 24th of August, and I'm back to make another astrology video. This time, the Sun has just ingressed into Virgo, and Saturn is in Pisces. So we are getting an opposition between the Sun in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces. And at the same time, Mercury has recently stationed retrograde, and there's the Earth signs are heavily loaded right now. So I made a video about this previously. I've been going through, in my previous videos, I said I've been going through a kind of phase of creative insecurity with my whole astrology practice and video blog making. But as you can see, I'm still making videos. I'm still pushing through it, and I might address some of that. In terms of like what kind of a day it is, I'm here on the west coast of Canada, and we have been getting our wildfire season, as often happens this time of year. So far, it's not the worst wildfire season I've ever experienced, but a lot of that is really just my experience of how I'm getting hit by the smoke. Because I'm quite a distance away from the actual fires themselves. It's more of like if the smoke is blowing in my direction or not, and how smoked out I am, basically, right? But there is a sort of quality I find. I mean, there's one thing about climate change and global warming and all this kind of stuff is that throughout the ages we've always had Sun opposite Saturn, and we've had forest fires to some degree. So it's not like a kind of a linear causal thing that just because the Sun is in opposition to Saturn that means you're going to get, or I think also my last video was on Mars Neptune, right? And I think there's something about Neptune which has something to do that works really well with the theme of pollution and environmental things. But there's something about this quality. The summer, you have this image of the summer as being like the sun is out, people are enjoying the sunshine, people are enjoying the weather, and then when you've got like a thick cloud of smoke obscuring that, it kind of puts a damper on what you'd usually expect from the summer. And in that sense, something about having the opposition between the sun and Saturn, a planet which stands basically for darkness and things that are like old age and illness. I mean, there's some more positive qualities of Saturn, but usually the positive qualities of Saturn have to do with sort of the seriousness, right? Maturity at approaching serious things, maturity at taking responsibility for things which may not be just light and easy, and dealing with environmental problems such as the forest fires. And I think it fits in some sense with both the Sun opposite Saturn and Mars opposite Neptune, which is active right now. And basically what you've got going on is you've got this grand trine with all the earth signs. You've got, now that the Sun's in Virgo, you've got the Sun, Mercury, and Mars in Virgo at the time I'm making this. You've got Pluto in Capricorn, you've got Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus. So you've got really, really stacked earth signs, and then you've got Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, for basically creating a kind of a kite aspect where you've got like the triangle, and then you've got the straight through the middle with the Pisces Virgo axis, right? And one of the things that was coming up to mind with this is the archetype of the Hermit. Now, I know that a lot of people don't like to just sort of like combine tarot cards and astrology, but whatever, I'm doing it anyways. But I was reading, especially Christian Meditations of the Tarot. The guy talks about how all sorts of people have come up with their own systems for associating tarot cards with signs, or and it's not really like a uniform thing or whatever. But anyways, I still think that archetype of the Hermit works because you've got Saturn often stands for the crone, the old man, the old wise man, or the person who is somewhat removed from society. And there is there's something about this sort of thing about whether you are isolated or separated or living like a hermit, that there are often these kinds of people who do it in a way intentionally, like if they were, let's say, mystics or Zen monks or Zen masters or hermits living in the woods or something. And in the Christian meditations and the tarot, they kind of make this point, though, that like there's something about the trustworthy, wise old hermit who is like kind of content to live this sort of solitary existence, and is not looking for worldly pleasure or something like that. Like another, like an example maybe is I often remember this guy Nisargadatta Maharaj, and one of the things, there's this Jack Kornfield interview where he's talking about meeting Nisargadatta Maharaj, and one of the things he says is that when you meet this guy, that you get this sense of love from him, but it's a kind of the transcendent love that's there is like the guy Nisargadatta is not asking anything from you. It's not a love that's like, won't you be my friend? Won't you be there with me? Won't you take away my loneliness? Won't you do? It's like there's really, you can have being open and compassionate, but really not wanting anything from the other person, right? Being completely free of that kind of attachment or craving or something like that. And I think to have that quality in being a hermit or being somebody who is isolated. I mean, the thing that's funny about Nisargadatta is not the best example, because he was a guy who lived in the inner city of what is now Mumbai, which used to be called Bombay, right? But there's the sense, the archetype of the crone or the wise old man, versus the shadow of that would be, let's say, the cranky old man, or the person who's not happy in their loneliness, who's not happy to live the life of a hermit. And on that note, I recently read the story Notes from the Underground by Dostoyevsky, and prior to that, I read I read The Idiot, and Notes from the Underground is a lot shorter. It's only about 100 pages, whereas The Idiot is something like 600 pages. So it took me a lot longer to get through The Idiot. And I have been thinking about whether I wanted to sort of make a video blog just talking about Dostoyevsky's stories, but I'm kind of holding back on it. But nonetheless, there's something about Notes from the Underground which I felt like it was important for me to read. And part of what that is about is that I had, in a previous video, years before, I had made a video about Neptune, and I was talking about the Tarkovsky movie Stalker, and talking about Neptune as representing this quality of the sublime, right? In that there is some sort of, and I think it has to do, I talk about it often with Neptune and Pisces and the sort of transcendental quality, right? And what's interesting I find about Notes from the Underground is that you've got a guy who is pretty miserable, but the guy talks about how if he just kind of sits there in his misery and there's something about this flip happens where all the bad circumstance or the stuff that he doesn't like, there's a kind of sublime transcendence that comes over him. But this guy talks about it in terms of a pleasure, right? Which is, most spiritual people would be like, we're trying to, the pleasure and pain are just two sides of the same coin, and the transcendence is a ecstasy that takes you away from pleasure, takes you away from playing something that's really higher than both of them, right? But then this guy sort of talks about, there's a kind of this thing where this guy has these moments of rapture or moments of ecstasy or something, but it only really seems to serve his sense of self-superiority over the other people, and that rather than being the kind of the hermit character who is content to live his solitary life, he's still very much resentful against all these other people, that he's to the point where he's hanging on to some story about, a failed social interaction that happened to him 15 years ago or 20 years ago or however long it was, right? And so there's this kind of thing about, this whole thing about the problem about like the sublime, or that, that you can have this, there's this whole thing that comes through with, like, I'd say a Buddhist attitude, right? Where, like, there's the world is perfect. There's a great perfection. The world is perfect as it is, and you don't have to do anything through your own striving to make the world perfect, right? And so that, like, somebody who is sort of tuned into this can have these sort of like moments of rapture and moments of reverie, but then, we often talk about it in terms of ego, coming back into the ego, and then having an identity of somebody who's superior, somebody who's better, or somebody who has desires that you're like, wow, the world is a beautiful, magic, transcendent place, but I still hate being lonely, and I still hate being like isolated, and I still hate having to put up with all these assholes. So, and then pretty soon it's like, what's the point of the transcendence if you're just going to be bitter about it, right? And so, but I think there's something there that's great in the Tarkovsky film, because like, if the Stalker guy was a cheery, happy guy, it wouldn't, like, what would he be doing, foraying out into the zone or something like that, into these desolate, polluted places and looking for this sort of secret or something like that. The idea is that it's not really something that a happy person would do, right? Like, happy people are happy with the trivial, mundane realities of life, it seems. They're not really interested in a transcendental sublime, because they're satisfied enough with the mundane, practical realities of existence, right? And there's something about this which was, like, I recorded a video that I decided to take down, and I don't know, what I intuitively got about this was, in my video that I recorded, I was talking about the Grand Earth Trine, and my own difficulty with the Grand Earth Trine, because how the only planet I have in Earth sign is Neptune, and when I relate to other people who are much more Earth oriented, the main thing that I notice is a better appreciation of the practical realities of life, right? And that there's something about being an astrologer, or being interested in stuff like astrology, that, I think in some way it could be practical, but I'll just, like, there's certain things, like, I personally, like, my family is really into, my mom and my sister are really into equestrian stuff, the world of horses, and looking after horses and riding horses, and I am not interested in this really at all. It could be very fair to use astrology for, let's say, if somebody wanted to buy a horse, or something like that, you could use divination. When's a good time to buy a horse? Or if there's something about, like, is this horse prone to injuries or not, that is not readily apparent, you could use divination for gaining more information about practical things going on, right? But the whole thing about this is, like, I'm using that as an example because in my own life, this is like why I've been posting about, or whatever, I've been hitting, Saturn can often be a kind of an obstacle, right? There's a certain obstacle that I have, mainly in that, it's like there's having a certain practice, right? And in order for that practice to be useful, it has to be configured to what, I read a lot of Gilles Deleuze, or to some degree, talks about the socius, right? You have to be configured to a socius. So, like, astrology is flexible in that it could be used for all sorts of different things, and that I don't have to be an equestrian enthusiast, but to be configured to people who may, want to use divination for those kinds of purposes or something like that. But as it is, like, there's a certain sense of separation, right? Where that people, like, there's a sort of sense that I get with, especially the sibling things with my sister specifically, in that she very much likes to have her own world, her own, like, the boundaries of personality, right? Where you say, this is something that I do, this defines me as a person, and that as being her, like, like, if I wanted, let's say, to work a practical job to like to make some money on the side. Like my sister does a lot of barn chores, and now I don't really identify as a horse person, but if I wanted to make a bit of money, I could say, oh, maybe I could do work at the barn to do some to get some exercise to do. But there's this thing where it's like not wanting as the brother to infringe upon the identity. Like there's a sort of, it's more about ego, right? Like, or like how you identify yourself, and there's a lot of investment in like really investing in doing something because that gives you a sense of self, right? And if it's not something that gives you that sense of self, it's sort of like, what the fuck are you doing? Maybe I'm getting off track, but there's really this kind of thing where, or to put it another way, is that, okay, I mean, let's get away from the horse thing, is that I've been running up against this obstacle for one thing about whether or not, let's like a Virgo being a practical, like planning for the future and all this kind of stuff, and looking at the brass tacks of like whether or not running an astrology business is like a feasible business practice or something like that, right? Whether it can actually, there are astrologers who are able to make it quite, to, like, I have friends who are able to pay for living downtown, like expensive living arrangements and having a name for themselves and being fully booked with clients. But it's like, again, as Deleuze says, I think that largely has to do with being configured to a socius. Like there's a social sphere of people who have a demand for this sort of service, and people who judge you as being a good person to provide the service. And there's something about being kind of isolated or being separated from the people who would be your paying clients that leaves you kind of out in the lurch in terms of having the work to do, right? And then when you look at the clients who do give you work, you kind of look at, where have I made these social connections? How am I configured to these people? Why do they relate to me as being somebody who they'd want to have a reading from and stuff like this? And some of the things is like, I run into this problem. There's friends that I have from the past. A guy who was talking to me, I won't get into all the details, but I mean, there was one conversation where the guy was kind of laying it out. Like, is it fair for a person to make a living off something like astrology, makes a living off something like divination work, whereas there's all these people who are busting their balls doing hard, like, physical labor or serious work, like, if somebody, we need infrastructure, we need people to be plumbers, we need people to be roofers, we need people to drive trucks, we need people to do all this kind of stuff, and these are the material existence of where we have food on the table, we have shelter, we have clothing, all this kind of stuff. This is really what is important in society. And do we really need people to be astrologers, right? And so, but the thing is, I mean, I did the favor of talking to this guy about astrology a lot, and I mean, this guy didn't pay me a dime because he didn't believe that what I was doing for him was worth any value, apparently, right? He didn't believe, he was interested enough to ask me all these questions about it, but at the end of the day, he thought that, hardworking people deserve money, astrologers apparently don't deserve money, right? Or that, you have to be configured toward, I don't know, like, so one of the things, this is kind of pressure I find to, the thing is also, I notice that there's other guys who do astrology readings who work a working class job, right? Like, I did a reading for another astrologer who was a guy who worked as a security guard, right? And I don't know if I ever want to work as a security guard, but it kind of like, that it's not separate. I don't like this whole thing about whether I have to give up astrology or not. Like, I could very well get some kind of a normal working class average job and still do astrology on the side, and that one doesn't necessarily cancel out the other, but that, that maybe by doing certain kinds of work that could put me in relation to associates that would provide me with new social avenues for people who might be interested in charts being read or stuff like that, right? But there's also this kind of thing where the idea of the, like the Sun opposite Saturn that we're talking about here, and the Sun stands for the hero archetype or the king archetype, and Saturn stands for the obstacle that either comes in terms of the old age, the old man who's not in a position to be the hero, so he's the old voice of experience, or it could be the sick person or the disabled person, or the other, basically the sense of essential kind of otherness to. And so I feel like there's this kind of, I get up in the morning every day, and I have the habit now of, I used to walk my dogs, but do it kind of irregularly. Like maybe once or twice a week I'd walk my dogs. But since I've had health problems, I had basically resolved this habit to just walk the dogs in the morning every single day, no matter what, to make sure that I'm starting my day off with some exercise, and also, being grounded to the physical world, so I'm not getting too off into la la land with my imaginal stuff, right? But the practical, if your actual grounded, lived experience of the world around me is basically like, you look around the world and what do you see? You see like guys being roofers, or guys, people doing construction work on roads, or you see people, like, I live near the farm, so people who work as farmers or fish, and there's all this sort of like, and I've lived in Vancouver with roommates, and there are a lot of guys who worked on things like housing renovations and all this kind of stuff, or another example could be like the forest fires themselves, like, require people to actually work as firefighters to go and try to put out forest fires, or to fly planes and drop water to like put out forest. And there's all this stuff going on that requires this sort of like involvement and engagement with the actual real material world. And that, there's this whole thing about the question of disability and mental illness and all this kind of stuff. And there's this whole thing about, I don't want to I kind of have at this place right now where I have been recovering from a number of health problems, whether some of them are physical and some of them may be construed as mental health problems, right? But there's this whole thing about like whether or not the disabled person gets a pass or something like that. That we get a sort of like, we make an exception for you because you are in a certain category where we don't expect you to be the heroic male who's going out there to be the handyman, to fight the forest fires, to do all this kind of thing, that you are, I think this is the Sun, the Saturn, I don't know. I don't want to put my whole chart out there, but I do have a Sun, Moon, Saturn conjunction, right? So this whole archetype of the Saturn being mixed or combined or playing off the Sun, where you've got the heroic male thing, but you've also got a sense of disability, or a sense of being removed from what the normal, heroic male does, and then being kind of cast outside from that, right? And whether that is seen as being bad or lazy or evil, or how do those two things play off of each other. And this whole thing, is part of why I was thinking, in prior videos I was doing this whole political thing where I was talking about, it was almost like, it was a joke, so I hope people don't take me too seriously, but I was talking about like doing Deleuzian astrology, or like I was trying to resolve these kind of political tensions. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, I come from a left-wing family, but what does it mean to be left-wing but to, the left-wing is all about the working class, basically. And that if I'm not engaged with this practical, material production of our culture and our society, it's not really that left wing. And if instead of engaged in this sort of like imaginal, it's more of like what the Deleuzians call the cosmic schizophrenia of being a crazy astrologer rather than doing practical, grounded, useful things that people value in society, and then, it's kind of turns into a lose-lose when, not only are you not respected for not being able to be the strong, productive force of heterosexual masculinity and going out there being a handyman and fixing up houses or putting out forest fires, but not only that is that you are going in the complete opposite direction, which is, a kind of like, what can you say about that? It's like you are, instead of being the heroic sun, you are being the antagonistic Saturn, but there's something about this sort of dualism between the sun and the Saturn, which I actually think is an opportunity. I don't know, I was hesitating whether this would be a good idea or not, but I might as well play my cards and make an astrology video where I read from Deleuze and Guattari's 1,000 Plateaus, because honestly, why not? And are there any other astrologers who are throwing 1,000 Plateaus into their astrology videos? If I was going to quit doing astrology, at least I could say, hey, I may not be doing astrology videos anymore, but I did do an astrology video where I threw in some 1,000 Plateaus, right? And who has done that before, right? If you guys know any other astrologers that are doing this, you can put their links in the comments, I guess, right? But as far as I know, I'm the only one who's doing this, and maybe there's a good reason why other people aren't doing this. But now, okay, just as a heads up. Whatever, this may be difficult or whatever, but again, what is Saturn but the planet of difficulty? I'm going to read a bit of 1,000 Plateaus, and maybe you can see how this resonates with the Sun opposite Saturn. Okay. Finally, the place or body of the despot or god has something like a counterbody. The body of the tortured, or better, of the excluded. This very Sun opposite Saturn, see? Already just the first sentence. There is no question that these two bodies communicate, for the body of the despot is sometimes subjected to trials of humiliation, or even torture, or of exile and exclusion. And that reminds me of the Game of Thrones thing, where they have the, remember when Cersei is put through all the trials of humiliation, she's still, and then she ends up being even more of a despot after that, right? So I got another thing. I think it would be great to do Deleuze and Guattari Game of Thrones videos, but okay, I'm just gonna keep reading. At the opposite pole, one might imagine placing the body of the condemned man. He too has his legal status. He gives rise to his own ceremonial, not in order to ground the surplus power possessed by the person of the sovereign, but in order to code the lack of power with which those subjected to punishment are marked. In the darkest region of the political field, the condemned man outlines the symmetrical, inverted figure of the king. The one who is tortured is fundamentally one who loses his or her face, entering into a becoming animal, a becoming molecular, the ashes of which are thrown to the wind. But it appears that one who is tortured is not at all the final term, but rather the first step before exclusion. Oedipus at least understood that. He tortured himself to gouge out his own eyes, then went away. The becoming animal of the scapegoat clearly illustrates this. A first expiatory animal is sacrificed, but a second is driven away, sent out into the desert wilderness. In the signifying regime, the scapegoat represents a new form of increasing entropy in the system of signs. It is charged with everything that was bad in a given period, that is, everything that resisted signifying signs, everything that eluded the referral from sign to sign through the different circles. It also assumes everything that was unable to recharge the signifier at its center and carries off everything that spills beyond the outermost circle. Finally, and especially, it incarnates that line of flight the signifying regime cannot tolerate. In other words, an absolute deterritorialization. The regime must block a line of this kind or define it in an entirely negative fashion precisely because it exceeds the degree of deterritorialization of the signifying sign, however high it may be. The line of flight is like a tangent to the circles of significance and the center of the signifier. It is under a curse. The goat's anus stands opposite the face of the despot or god. Anything that threatens to put the system to flight will be killed or to be put to flight itself. Anything that exceeds the excess of the signifier or passes beneath it will be marked with a negative value. Your only choice will be between a goat's ass and the face of the god, between sorcerers and priests. The complete system then consists of the paranoid face or body of the despot god in the signifying center of the temple. The interpreting priests who continually recharge the signified in the temple, transforming it into the signifier, the hysterical crowd of people outside, clumped in tight circles, who jump from one circle to another, the faceless, depressive scapegoat emanating from the center, chosen, treated, and adorned by the priest, cutting across the circles in its headlong flight into the desert. This excessively hasty overview is applicable not only to the imperial despotic regime, but also to all subjected, aberrant, hierarchical, centered groups, political parties, literary movements, psychoanalytic associations, families, conjugal units, etc. The photo, faciality, redundancy, significance, and interpretation are at work everywhere. The dreary world of the signifier, its archaism, with always contemporary function, its essential deception, connoting all of its aspects, its profound antics. The signifier reigns over every domestic squabble and in every state apparatus. There you go. So there's this kind of thing where I found that I want to include that because it resonates, I feel, very strongly with the archetypes of the Sun opposite Saturn, basically saying that you have this solar kind of heroic image that is affirmed as the good, and that everything that stands opposed to that is basically the goat's ass in the system, right? And that I think that you can trace this back to astrology, where Saturn is a kind of a threshold, basically, right? And now, obviously in modern astrology, we have things like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which stand on the other side of Saturn, right? But there's this whole idea that, like, you are either, this idea that you are upholding the holy kingdom of God, you're there with which is in terms of when we had monarchy, that the king was the divine representative of God, and that you were upholding the wishes of the king to do as you were ordered, to be the heroic male who did all this stuff, and that if you were to divert away from that, you were essentially in line with the devil, you were a black magic sorcerer, you were a villain, and all this kind of stuff. And there's this kind of this black and white kind of thing of like being in obedience, of like going with the status quo, or going off in the other direction, and being a kind of a mutiny or whatever, right? And there is this kind of thing about that Deleuze is always talking about the multiplicity, right? In the sense that there's something about, like, you can say no to the status quo, but it's not a binary thing. There could also be multiple different options and multiple different directions of where you go. But there's this sort of, like, I feel it turns into this kind of oppressive thing where it's like all heterosexual men need to be basically like manual laborers. Like, you need to be a carpenter, you need to do drywall work, you need to go and like be a logger or a miner, or you need to to be a truck driver or something like that. And that there's this kind of thing where I mean, I'm not saying that, like, I don't know, what am I trying to say? I mean, there's this kind of pressure I feel that it's like, the whole thing is like, if you are outside that system, then it's like you are, they want to exclude you because they need people to do that work, you know, that if they start undermining the fact that, you know, you can, I think that they even, I don't really want to, well, I mean, I think it's kind of funny because it's sort of like trans politics kind of goes with this maybe, but I don't know if I want to, like, people often use Deleuze and Guattari to talk about, like, you know, transitioning from one gender to another, right? But the thing is, it's like, how many trans people are working as truckers, is working as construction workers, is working as this and that, you know, that there's this sort of like, versus like, I don't know, like I've got a Rachel Pollack book, like Rachel Pollack was a famous trans person who transitioned and became a famous tarot reader, and it's like, do you have to change your gender to do something different, or can you be a heterosexual male and then do something which is considered feminine? You know, or like they're like, no, that's wrong. You have to go lift weights. You have to make yourself big and strong, and you have to present yourself as this tough male guy and talk about things like martial arts or working out at the gym, or like, and then it's essentially rewarded for, you know, propping up the status quo. And then if you don't do that, you are like the hairy goat's ass. You know, you're the black magic sorcerer who's undermining the good things which, you know, all the good work our heroic working class does, right? And I think, I don't know. This is basically what's on my mind anyways. I don't know if this is the best thing to put out there. But whatever. This is the direction the creative process is going today anyways. Geez, I don't know. Hope you guys like this, but whatever. It is what it is. Okay.